Hi everyone, welcome to the show. This is your host, Mandy Kalesi. I'm going to be sharing this conversation here with Mike Sheetal, the CEO of Playbrain. So just like to introduce myself on the show first, then we'll get to Mike. Um, yeah, my name is Mandy Kalesi. I'm the host of the show The Word, where we speak with founders and CEOs about leadership and entrepreneurship in technology. So today I'm really thrilled, happy, and inspired to meet Mr. Michael Sheetal, Mike Sheetal again, CEO of Playbrain, an esports and game marketing company. And so I'd love to. I've been meaning to catch up with you for a while, and it was good to catch up recently, and good to speak with you again, Mike. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. Very nice to meet. Nice to see you here, and nice to see the show up and running.
Yes, finally, as they say. Look, Mike, I think we've known each other for a while, but what I do know from your background is that you're an entrepreneur and you have been an entrepreneur for a couple of years, serial entrepreneur, should we say? So maybe you can just tell me a little about yourself and a bit about your company, Playbrain.
Okay, so originally I'm from Australia. I grew up in Sydney, and I worked in the games industry in a little bit in Australia before I came to Japan. But I have been actually in Japan for about 20 years now, so quite a while.
Respect.
And I have had a few careers since I arrived here. I first worked in I worked in television first. I was an editor for a TV show. I moved into advertising. Then after doing that for a little while, I realized that, oh, I could maybe do this for myself. And that's sort of when I got started on my entrepreneur journey. And I sort of have gone through several stages before my current company, Playbrain, which we have focused on esports and gaming, and really very heavily focused on the content creation side of that. And so we engage in production of events. We also do a lot of online content to promote various games, but also other things that gamers love as well. So various products and things like that, and just a general supporter of the gaming culture as well. That's sort of like our role in the world.
So I think you kind of touched on it briefly, but I just wanted to dig a little bit into like the reason why you decided to set up your own business, because I understand, kind of looking online, looking you up online, I understand that you had a company, previous to used to Playbrain, but then you actually decided to kind of move on from that and start up, Playbrain, afresh. So can you kind of just kind of take us through like why Playbrain?
So there's a few steps to that answer. If we go sort of like back when I first had my first forays into the advertising industry, I found myself one of the leaders in developing the digital studio for a small advertising agency here in Tokyo. And after doing that for 3 years, I started foolishly thinking to myself, I could probably do that for myself and start my own company because I kind of made a company for somebody else. Little did I know that there's a lot more to making a company than what I'd been
Hmm.
doing at that time. But that was sort of like the beginning of that was sort of like my naive first starts into starting my first company, which was a company called Ultra Super New,
Hmm.
which was a creative agency.
Hmm.
We started off as a very digital heavy creative agency, but very quickly grew to be a full service creative agency. That was a really, really big learning experience in terms of a journey. And I mean, overall, quite a successful one too. We were probably best known for our work with Red Bull. We were the agency for
I
Red
remember
Bull in
that. Yeah.
Japan for about 8 years. Out of that time, that I was running the company for about 10. So 8 years of that was Red Bull, which was an amazing experience, and really, really sort of formative in the way I thought about the way that we should create media and the way that we should communicate with people in general, as on behalf of brands or with brands, as it
Right.
was. But we worked with a lot of different
Hmm.
clients and things like that during that time. And I sort of started to develop a thesis on what communication should be like create the most satisfying experience for consumers, as well as create good brand image as well. Very much my feelings started to move towards content needs to be really held a lot higher, whereas traditional advertising methods where you're just really talking at somebody needed to move much more towards the background. And so that's essentially a lot of the intent that sort of came behind PlayBrain as I started that. After 10 years of working with Ultra Super New, I also felt that I wanted to focus more. And so I had a very amicable sort of parting with Ultra Super New. I sold that company. And the team that is running it is still my business partners from that time who are doing a great job. And I decided to focus just on gaming. And that was the like part 2 of the special secret sauce that I wanted to create with PlayBrain.
Are you a gamer?
I have been a gamer since my very formative years, so yes.
Favorite game?
Favorite game. This has changed a lot over the years. I got to say that the game that I play the most right now is probably Battlegrounds, which is a Hearthstone Battlegrounds. But the main reason for that is because I can play quickly. I don't have the time that I used to when I was younger, and so I can't really sit down for hours on end playing a game as much as I used to be able to. So I'm sort of reduced to things that I can play quickly these days.
Second question, Xbox or PlayStation?
We're in Japan. It's got to be PlayStation.
Console or mobile?
I think you choose the right thing for the right time. If you're outside, you're 100% mobile. If you're at home, console can be a better solution. If you're sitting on the sofa and don't really want to look towards the TV set, mobile can still be the solution. If you're sitting at your desk, then maybe PC is a better solution. Yeah.
So if I want to get rich and famous with esports, what should I do?
Sorry, what was that?
So if I want to become rich and famous with esports, what's the trick?
If you want to become rich and famous with esports as a player?
Yeah.
Well, you have to practice really hard. Okay, there's 2 ways to do it. Number one, you can be a really good player, and top esports teams are actually paying very, very good salaries for players who are really top level. But number 2, you can be a great entertainer, and so that's the other angle. And it helps to be a good player as well as a great entertainer. But those are the 2 things that create success in the industry for a content creator, as we say. And so the esports angle is much more like being a sportsman, and the sort of the entertainer angle is much more like being a comedian or a TV host or something like this. So there's those sort of parallels that are probably easy for most people to understand.
Esports in 5 years, what does it look like?
I think just what we see over the years is the legitimacy of esports growing. Esports is taken more seriously in terms of being a legitimate place to put sponsorship money, for example, and it also is a really strengthening sort of entertainment content as well. And we see like every year it's just growing at a crazy rate. We see about 50% year-on-year growth in the amount of watched hours in esports in Japan right now, which is it's quite a phenomenal growth. The just like people are watching it in longer periods, and more people are watching essentially every year. And the content quality is just growing as well, and I think that has a lot to do with it as well. A few years ago, you would never have had a stadium-sized esports event in Japan. These days, we have a few of them. Every other month there seems to be something coming through.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine myself being in a stadium for hours just watching people play a game. But if I think back to myself playing a game, it's what's different to that, right? It's just it's a communal experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think you can align it very like if you've gone to a football game or something like this.
Yeah.
You've got 20,000-30,000 people in a live audience watching a football game and cheering at the top of their lungs. The same exact situation exists for esports. People are passionate about the skill and the celebrity of these players, and the teams that they play for. And this is like just a more contemporary, I guess, style of sports.
Yeah, I was checking out a couple of the games that you support, and you mentioned I forget, is it Hearthstone? No, Stone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So right now, the main titles that we work with, League of Legends, which is a game by Riot Games, which is sort of like the OG of esports.
Yeah.
The competitive scene has been alive for, I want to say, 11 or 12 years now, and is really the strongest, like in terms of the scale of viewership and things like that. It's very strong. We manage the Japanese league, and also handle the localization broadcasts for all of the international major competitions as well. And so that's really huge one. We work with that. We work with Rainbow Six, which is by Ubisoft, and we collaborate with Docomo on that project too. It's been a really good project for us this year. And Blizzard Hearthstone has been a sort of a long-term relationship for us as well.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, League of Legends looked pretty fun last night when I was checking it out. The Hearthstone is like, it's not really me. But League of Legends, that sounds like something I could spend an inordinate amount of time on. Kind of scary. But yeah, that's definitely something I need to check out a bit more. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to the kind of business side in terms of there's been a lot talked about entrepreneurship here in Japan. I think that the government is trying to kind of support growth of entrepreneurs, and it's going to be the year one of entrepreneurship in Japan again. What would you say to people either thinking about or wanting to start out in business today? What would you say to? What's your advice to people from a successful entrepreneur to a newbie?
Look, starting your own company is not easy. It's a lot of surprises, and you end up being a fireman most of the time trying to put out fires. From my first company that I started, I learned a lot of those basic, how does the employment laws work in Japan, because they're quite unique actually. There's a lot of very specific things to Japan that you have to understand, and that is number one, that is like really kind of critical to understand as soon as you start employing people and have people working on the various teams that you're running, through to even just registering a company actually is a hurdle as a non-native Japanese speaker. I get by all right these days. My Japanese isn't too bad, but when I started my first company, I really had next to zero Japanese. Really, I didn't really have business Japanese, and fighting through all those legal documents that you need to put together in Japanese was quite an effort. But in general, I got to say, my experience, the Japanese government hasn't made it that easy for startups. It's quite a hostile environment. There's a lot of very punishing hoops that you have to jump through. And so it seems to be a country that really favors the larger businesses from a startup perspective in the era that I started up. I don't know if some of those things have been eased right now. Maybe it's a little bit easier than it used to be, but it certainly was not an easy one when I got going.
Well then, so what kind of advice, so if you could go back in time, like 20 years back or 15 years back, and give yourself one piece of advice when you were starting out, like what's the advice you'd give yourself? Knowing what you know now.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I would interfere too much, because I think naivety and not knowing allowed me to do things. If I'd known what I know now, I may never have got things started. Because there was a lot of, I think it's reasonably well known that companies in their first 2 years, especially that second year, really faced the trials of getting started. And in both cases, with Ultra Super New and with Playbrain, my second year was the most challenging. That's when you start to, the economic realities generally hit you. First year, you can usually sort of sail through that stuff, and then you really need to sort of work out where you're going to make sure that you can cover payroll from and that sort of stuff a bit more seriously. And being ready for that moment is basically defines whether you continue your business or not. And I got sideswiped a few times in both companies in that early phase, just trying to work out which way's up and where my next client was coming from and things like that. And thankfully, we managed to weather the storm, and then getting through that difficult sort of second year sort of puts you on a pretty strong path going forward in my cases. And that's been a lot of aid. I don't know if I would tell myself too much of some of those bad things they're going to hit, because then you probably you just don't try, you don't take those like big pivots that you kind of need the naivety to take, and you don't shoot for the stars. You sort of go conservative, and you don't really create much of a company if you do that.
So what is the kind of thing, I guess, from as a leader, you're kind of setting up the company, you're trying to get through that second year, like what is the what separates the those who fall by the wayside with those who kind of somehow make it through to the other side of the second year? Like what is the thing that you think kind of helped you power through that challenge, that tough time?
Honestly, and I don't want to scare people too much, but honestly, I think it's the ability to take punishment. In terms of like the emotional hit and the sometimes financial hit that you need to take. I don't talk about this so much publicly, but like with my first company, I had to take a significant time without paying myself just to make all the costs met. And sometimes you just need to be willing to do that, and some people are willing and some people are not willing, and the ones that are not willing will shut down their company at that point. And at the basics, you have to look after your staff, right? If you do not make sure that those staff get paid and compensated for their time, they will not follow you to the next goals. So you really need to look after them first. Then second, you got to look after your vendors, and then you come last on the list. And so your willingness to do that is really important. And ultimately, if you're leading that company, the buck stops with you. So whatever's happening, you need to be the one that will make sure it gets done. And that it can be quite harsh sometimes. And you just got to be ready. And that's the lot of a startup CEO, I think. Yeah. So
yeah, it sounds like kind of servant leadership, and just kind of just knuckling down and just somehow working it out is kind of what I'm
hearing. Yeah, because you make decisions, and sometimes you don't have all the information to make the best decision, right? So you work with the information that you have at your fingertips. And so if you can put yourself in a position to just follow through and get that thing done, you're able to tackle the next thing you need to do. But if you break on that first one when it didn't really turn out as you expected, then you're really not made for that kind of thing. You should work for somebody else.
Is there just kind of I know we're a bit tight for time, but is there someone else that, I mean, obviously you've been an entrepreneur for a while, and you have a pretty broad network. Like, is there another founder or another CEO, either in Japan, elsewhere, that you kind of, obviously that personally, that you've interacted with, and that you kind of either aspire to, or you admire, or you is there someone that you kind of that you admire personally in terms of leadership, entrepreneurship?
Probably if I think about, there's a number of people who've inspired me in different ways, and of course I can have the standard answers of like Elon Musk did that and Steve Jobs did this. I don't necessarily think everything they did was gold, but that they had some interesting approaches. But if I think about my personal experience, I think the ex-head of Red Bull Japan was really a good sort of teacher about what it means to be the leader of a team for me. And to be more specific, he was a South African guy, so not Japanese, but he managed to capture the emotion of a mostly Japanese team in Japan, and capture their inspiration and really empower them in a great way. And I've never seen somebody achieve that to that level coming from outside of Japan. I think that was a really, really good demonstration to me of what it can be. And just overall nice guy as well, which helped. But really good leader in that sense. Really great at empowering people and then putting them in a place to succeed.
Well, look, thanks so much for that. I think we're coming up to time, so I just wanted to just don't know if there was anything you wanted to, any last call to action words from yourself to the listenership that you wanted to give in the last 1 or 2 minutes.
I mean, I think entrepreneurship can be scary, but it's something that if you're made of the right stuff to kind of tackle all those challenges, I think creating something for yourself is incredibly empowering as well. So yeah, I definitely, if you feel you can take some of those hits, I definitely recommend it. So go for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for the chat today. I think we need to do the next one over beers. So you hold me to that, and
absolutely,
we'll continue that conversation. Thanks so much. So today we're thrilled to have Mike Sheetal, who is CEO of Playbrain, an amazing esports and game marketing company based here in Tokyo in Hiro. I'd like to thank you so much, Mike, for your time today and your thoughts. Best of luck for Playbrain, and until we meet again for beers. And thanks also to the listeners today out there. Thanks for listening, and look forward to seeing you on the next show. Bye for now. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for having me on.